So the extension brings quite a few improvements to existing tools, and it also brings a couple of new functionality and a brand new node. So these brand new nodes are in Flame and Flare, mostly available as batch nodes. And in Smoke, they will also appear in a new FX2 submenu of the edit desk as modules. And of course, Smoke versions that actually support batch effects will also get the batch nodes, the matching batch nodes. Let's take a look at the first new tool that I want to show you, which is a gradient tool. So here we're in batch with this new gradient tool here. And let's take a look at some of its functionality. So essentially, the gradient tool presents 4 different modes that it can work in: directional, radial, spline, and point. The first 3 modes, directional, radial, and spline, kind of share the same UI concept to actually define your gradient colors. So with your triangles here, you can actually define ramps, color ramps, and if I double click on the color pot, I can actually change the color very easily, drop that into the color pot. I can also add color pots to this selection and define the color. Go ahead and customize my gradients. All of these color ramps are fully keyframeable, can be animated over time, and as you see, as I switch between the different modes, I can have entirely different settings, but the ramp functionality is actually identical. The gradient actually both supports transparency ramps, the alpha ramps, and color ramps. And we provide you with tools to actually copy your ramps from the different sections to the alpha, from the alpha to the color. It's pretty flexible. An interesting thing that you'll see is that if I can actually repeat the gradient pattern. Here you see I have options, much like you would repeat a texture inside of Axon. So by default you would be in constant mode, but if I select the repeat option, it kind of repeats itself, and if I select the mirror option, it does a mirror repeat exactly like in Action. And it's very easy to create cycles, animated cycles, by just adding keyframes to the cycle parameter, which is probably quite well named for that. The interesting thing is that every single mode kind of has a bit of an interesting twist. So if we look at the radial gradient, well, first of all, there's all the gradients really can pretty much be manipulated as objects. So you will see that pretty much everyone allows you to control the position and in Y, the scaling, and the rotation. So here this is a circular gradient, so it doesn't necessarily show much, but you can see that I can do it both on widgets as well as I can do it with numeric fields. Okay. The interesting twist of the radial blur is that I can take the center shape and move it around. It's constrained to the outer circle, but you see it will create it can create some really interesting hypnotic, funky effects. And another interesting thing is that it has a roundness parameter that can allow you to gradually go from essentially a round shape to something that's a lot more angular. It can be a perfect square, but even something that's more of a, I don't know, a weird star shape, I guess. But the same principle are still applicable, so you can still move things around. It's kind of like an interesting little twist that you have there. So it becomes very easy, obviously, to use this circular gradient to do all sorts of things, including displacement maps, animated displacement maps. It's pretty cool for that. If I switch to the spline mode, that's kind of an interesting beast. As you see, I have a spline there, and it has control points that I can move along. And as you see, the gradient is kind of warping itself as I actually adjust my control points. So these are pretty much control as you would control a Gmask, really. It's kind of the same thing. An interesting thing that you will see, it also features amplitude keys that can actually slide across the gradient, okay? Just like any other gradient, it also supports mirror repeats. Okay, so this creates really funky patterns, and of course all of this is fully keyframeable. And when things actually get really funky, you can resort to actually a softness control when you have kind of artifacts that may happen from like really impossible situations to figure out. There's a softness control that's actually common also to all gradients, where you can essentially get rid of any unwanted artifacts. Much like you would do on a Gmask spline, you can actually switch to add mode and, let's say, add an extra control key. So if I switch to move, you see I can adjust it, adjust its tangents. But while I'm in add mode also, I can hit the control key and I can also add an amplitude key. And as you see, at that point, I can then create a very specific profile along my spline. So this is kind of really interesting and quite flexible, and it can create really funky effects. The point gradient is really a mode of its own. So really what it features is color points really that you can move around. And every color point, as you see, there's a list that I have in the UI. So it's a slightly different UI from the other gradient modes. But as soon as I select one of the color points, it's actually selected in that list. And essentially in the list, I can decide really how much importance a particular color should have. So here you see I'm kind of controlling how much magenta I'm adding in this particular pot. But I can also control the radius of influence, which then will determine how this particular color pot is going to interfere with the other color pots around it. So if I move it around, it becomes much more powerful in its interference with other gradients. Of course, you're not limited in any way to the number of points that you can have. You can add as many as you want. And again, points can also have their own alpha. So here I just added a white point. But of course, if I want to change its color, I can just go ahead and switch to RGB and set it to whatever I want. There I go. And I have another extra point. If you look also at the gradient node, you will notice that it actually has two inputs. It has a matte input, and it also has an image input. And the interesting thing is that the gradient mode actually allows you to first of all blend the gradient that you're creating with the input image. So, for example, if I click here, you'll see that I have access to a whole list of blending modes, and I can select multiply, and then decide that that I actually want to have my color ramp be multiplied. And you will see that if I look at my incoming alpha, I have a Gmask that currently is piped into my gradient, and it's actually acting as a constraint. The interesting thing is that since the gradient can also generate its own transparency information. So here, for example, I have a case where I actually have a transparency ramp. You will notice that if I switch to my matte out, I actually have a combination of the Gmask input with the actual transparency ramp that is generated by the gradient. And this is, so you have the option to actually combine alphas or only keep the actual transparency ramp that is generated by the gradient. So that's a lot of flexibility that you have there, and you can create quite interesting effects with that. So certainly encourage you to play with it. Moving on, I'd like to actually go more into detail into a lot of the enhancements that we're bringing into the extension.